Okay, great. So let's go ahead and get started because we have a great speaker with us today, an old friend of ours and somebody who actually worked at a DOT for 34 years. So I hope some of you will take advantage of having Gary with us. He worked at the New Jersey DOT. You'll hear that in his accent. And and for those of you that can stick around, Gary's cleared his calendar for 90 minutes. So he's got a presentation, answer some questions, and then he has a lot of experience in placemaking and understands Idaho communities pretty well. He's spent a fair amount of time out here. He's never been to Orofino though, but he has been to Haley. So with that, Gary, I'm going to turn it over to you. Oh, just make sure everybody that you put your computers on mute. And then if you have a question, just go ahead and raise your hand virtually and I'll go ahead and select you when Gary's taking a break. So Gary, you want to go ahead?
Sure. Wait a minute, did I do this right? Do you see the presentation? No, wait a minute.
I see your desktop.
Let me hold on. All right. Yeah, like we did. You should see it now. Wait a minute.
It's still your desktop.
There you go.
Oh, there it is. Yep.
All right. Okay, so thank you for the opportunity to virtually revisit Idaho. I have been there a number of times. I've been to Boise 5 or 6 times. I've been to Haley. I've been to Sandpoint. Spent a couple days in Idaho Falls. So, and I was always amazed by how diverse the state is. I remember on the ride back from Haley back to Boise so I could get on the plane. You know, it was like you were going through 3 or 4 different states. And it's all beautiful. So, yeah, so Cynthia asked me to do this module called Learning the Language through the Walking Fellows Institute. A little bit about myself. I did spend 34 years at the New Jersey Department of Transportation. And then later I ended up working for the Project for Public Spaces, running their transportation program. Those of you familiar with PPS know that they are into placemaking, and that transportation, Fred Kent, the president of PPS, understood that transportation is integral to placemaking. You can't make great places unless your streets accommodate it. I have worked a lot out in the Mountain West. I was working with Clark at first the Sonoran Institute and then Community Builders. So I've been to Montana a number of times. I worked for Federal Highways Context Sensitive Solutions Program. So I did workshops with the ITD people in Boise. I worked with some of the district people in Sandpoint and in Haley. So I've got a pretty good feel for what's going on out there. Although one of the things I find in a large state that has districts, as many districts as you do, is that the districts, the state DOTs do not usually operate like an integrated agency. There's some autonomy in the districts, and sometimes it's pretty amazing how different things are from one to the other. So these are the things I'm going to talk about today. These were listed in the course outline, and I think Cynthia gave folks some readings on this, and the safe systems approach, and what are the strategies then to overcome as you try to implement the safe systems approach. A little bit on the role of the community. We can whiz through those if we want to spend time on other things. And finally, I have a little story about engineers, that we're not really bad people. And I try to show pictures of me on my e-bike because it's my new latest fun hobby. Okay, I'm not going to read this to you. Hopefully you did read it as part of your homework. I'll leave it there for 30 seconds. There's 2 pages of this. But this is the Federal Highway Administration Safe Systems Approach. Now, as you look at it, you might say, ho hum. I did, because people were saying this back in 1950 and 1960, right? Almost the same thing. But there's a couple nuances in this that I want to share with you that I think is signaling an attempt by the Federal Highway Administration to change the approach. I fear it may be a little too nuanced sometimes in terms of people getting it, but here we go. So the first nuance is proactive. So I'm going to turn it over to the audience. Does anybody want to take a crack at determining why you think I highlighted this as a significant nuance? It's like a real, when you're in real time, Cynthia, it takes a while, right? Somebody needs to break the ice. Cynthia, you want to take a crack at it?
I will take a crack at it, Gary. So what I see is we have designed a system where we think crashes are part of a modern transportation system. And so then what happens when there's a crash, whether it's a fatality or a serious injury, we then react to that. And I guess by we, I'm saying local government, DOTs, right? And we say, oh my gosh, that intersection is unsafe. We need to fix it, versus saying ahead of time, we need to design a system where those crashes don't occur. How's that?
It sounds good. Does anybody else want to feed off of that now? Okay. Here's what I think it means, right? Historically, we've addressed safety through the application of standards. And it's gotten to the point, like in the agency I worked in, New Jersey Department of Transportation, it's typical government. We always have too much to do and too little time. And so the tendency is to not be proactive and be creative. The tendency is to just go back and lean on the book and do, it's just faster that way and cleaner, and people feel safer following the standards. So that's what it says down there on the bottom. This is from the Federal Highway Administration Safety Manual. But what this is showing is that this is the real world doesn't function the way the design manuals say. It's not all of a sudden 11-foot lane is unsafe and 12-foot lane is safe, right? There's a continuum. And this continuum actually applies. It's very different in the middle of a town like Haley or Orofino or downtown Boise than it is on the road that goes. I remember that road going to Haley. Went there at night. I guess you go up through as Idaho Falls or Twin Falls. And it's this long, dark road, but it's there's a different continuum there than there is in our villages. So you're right, following the book is reactive. And so what the Federal Highway has been trying to encourage, and a lot of state DOTs, and there was discussions of this at ITD, and some people get it and some people don't. The whole idea is let's try to be proactive and think about what we're doing instead of just following the book. So I like to say this, in other words, let's put the engineering back in engineering. This is a graphic picture I took. I was in Brazil, actually, in Brasilia, one of the most car-oriented places in the world. In fact, it was intentionally designed to facilitate movement by cars and take the pedestrian out of things. And but we got together because a developer wanted to develop a new neighborhood in Brasilia that was different. He wanted to show a model. So we actually sat down, had some stakeholders in, talked about what can we do. We didn't simply design roads to travel at 45 or 55 miles an hour and put sidewalks on the side of them. We actually designed a portion of the community so that we intentionally designed it so that people can get to the core downtown district faster by bike than by car. So that's an example of proactive roadway design. I want to put this in because and this will be a theme throughout and at the end of our conversation. Like any other human being on the planet, folks that work for a DOT don't take, it's not a good way to start a conversation by hollering at them or calling them names. Or I've had people call me up when I was at New Jersey DOT wanting to know who was the stupid SOB that designed this roadway, right? And my first reaction was, okay, name, rank, and serial number. That's all you're going to get from me. So we'll talk about this a little more later. So back to the safe systems approach. What do you guys think? Why do you think I highlighted these two bullets? Go ahead, Cynthia. What do you think?
So I would say that those two are related, and that slower speeds save people's lives.
Yes. And it's for everybody too. It's not just for pedestrians and bicyclists. It's safer for cars in general. So the first bullet, I think, is basically talking about complete streets. Make sure there's accommodations for everybody. That's what create conditions that prioritize their ability to reach their destination. But I also think it does relate to taking proactive design measures to achieve the desired operating speed. And I'll talk about operating speed in a little bit. So Federal Highway, actually, before the safety measures that they were talking about, they issued a memorandum about 10 years ago, because Federal Highway started to become, headquarters Federal Highway started to become fairly proactive and concerned about promoting walking and biking and safer roadways. And they realized that there was a lot of misunderstanding and misconceptions out in their district offices and in the state DOTs about the things on this. So this is the list that was up on the front of the memorandum, and there was a description of each one of these things. And the intent was to have this drill down into the states through the division offices, and to try to dispel the myths that we can't do roundabouts, that we don't like pedestrian crossing islands, road diets are bad. So I'm going to talk about these one at a time. So roundabouts. So just a quick introduction to what a true roundabout is. It's all roundabouts versus circles. And in New Jersey, we probably lead the nation in circles per capita. In circles, in a true roundabout, everybody has to yield before they get in, so that the people that are inside the circle can continue to circulate. A true roundabout is a smaller diameter than a lot of the circles. And the reason for the small diameter is it forces people to slow down. And that looks like a traffic jam, but it's amazing how many times a roundabout, even here in New Jersey down the road from where I live, actually ease traffic congestion, because people are behaving in a more orderly, civilized fashion at 15 miles an hour. This is one of the typical circles that we had in New Jersey. And you can see that it's much larger diameter. But also, what you can see is that there's no deflection. In a roundabout, you want to make the cars deflect, because that's why they're going to slow down to go around the circular feature. But in a lot of older circles going back to the 50s and 40s, there was no deflection. So what would happen would be people are going 40 or 45 miles an hour through the straight edges of the circle. And since they didn't have to yield upon getting into the roundabout, folks were getting trapped in the roundabout because they're stopped and try to come out and get through into the traffic. So, and then it would back up, and sooner or later they would block the through lanes of the roundabout of the circle. So, so this is briefly, what are the differences between the two? Common misconception about roundabouts is that large vehicles can't get through them. And so in places where it is anticipated there's going to be a lot of trucks, they put that inner apron in there. You can see it here, right? Where it's a mountable thing. Cars, I mean, I've been traveling through a lot of roundabouts because there's a lot of them in New Jersey now, and it's pretty amazing. Cars will honor this. They will not go across that, but it allows the trucks, which need a bigger turning radius, to go across it. There's roundabouts proposed in Idaho, and I think these are under construction, right, in Idaho Falls.
Gary, those are actually built in Idaho Falls. They just need to add the pedestrian crosswalks.
This is the drone video you sent me. And notice the trucks. And you see how it operates? Now they're all pausing before they get into the roundabout. And then when a space opens up, then they carefully and politely go in. And there is a lot of spaces generated because once they yield, that only so many people can get into the circle at any one time. There's safety benefits, amazing reduction of crashes, and particularly injury crashes. There's some fender benders because the cars could still hit each other, but since they're doing it at 15 miles an hour, it's the fatality and injury crashes are, as you can see, reduced by 86%. And these are statistics from different state DOTs around the country. There's probably about 10 that really are the vanguard in terms of going ahead and doing this. Other proven safety measures are crosswalk treatments. I'm only going to show one slide on this. I think Cynthia, your group is probably pretty well versed on this, but there's all kinds of ways to address the federal highway recommendation that we should be doing more and more of these in places because they really do make a difference. Another proven safety measure that federal highways recommended are road diets. This is an example of one that used to look like this. And they went from 4 lanes to 3 lanes. And again, this is much safer. And the reason why it's much safer, if you think about it, right? Think about this road and how people are operating. But you know, if people are coming up at 4, they tend to want to speed, but there's also a lot of people that are pulling over and trying to get into a parking space or trying to get into the driveway across the roadway. And so you've got all these different speeds. You've got people turning their head, looking this way and that way and so on. And the whole thing is sort of like streamlined because of this. If somebody's slowing down in their car to pull into a parking space, everybody has to slow down. So the safety statistics on this are pretty amazing. We did one in my hometown. We did it with paint. And it's pretty remarkable that before this road diet, where the road was 4 lanes, cars were routinely traveling at 55 miles an hour on this road, even though you can see the houses on the one side of the roadway. And now they're all basically going the speed limit. It only takes one person to go the speed limit to make everybody behind them go to speed limit. And so that gets back to the concept that you'll see later in the presentation of self-enforcing design. So here's some statistics from some road diets. Speeding goes down, crash rate goes down, bikes go up. The actual, in New York City, which they kept a lot of statistics on this, the actual people throughput on roads that went through a road diet went up, right? The cars pretty much stayed the same. They slowed down and pedestrians increased and bicyclists increased. So the people throughput of a road on a road diet is actually higher in many instances. So some other proven safety measures. These were not listed in the Federal Highway memorandum, but these are stuff that I've come across over time. Got to look for the these wide corner radii, which you know, are designed to allow cars to go around the corner quickly and oftentimes trucks. But what it does, as you can see, is increasing the pedestrian crossing distance and then also forcing them to step into a path of a car that's going too fast as compared to one that comes up to the corner and has to make a right turn. a hard right. I'll let you decide whether you got any of these in your town. Too wide corner radii or ramps that are allowing people to go very quickly through an intersection. Other proven safety measures, there's something called level of service. Anybody know what level of service is? All right, back to you, Cynthia. I think you know.
I know what it is, but I'm hoping that somebody from one of the other communities can speak to that. Isabel, do you know what level of service is?
I don't, but I can guess.
Okay.
From picture. Well, I'm assuming if there is a high quality level of service that there is a lot more attention to what the needs are of the community, and they're being addressed much more quickly and efficiently. And going back to the point of being proactive, definitely a high level of service would be a proactive level of service. So getting ahead of problems. Yeah, that's my guess.
Yeah, that's a good guess. That's fairly close, except that you might have, in the engineers consider a high level of service cars traveling through congestion free, as opposed to community members who would consider a high level of service as something that is allowing everybody on foot, on bike, and in cars to share the road carefully. Level of service is something that was invented for the interstate system. Made sense if you're building a road that is going across the country, that you don't want it to be backed up the entire time. So they would project the traffic volume, and they created a scale. And I often wondered whether it was sinister. The scale is A through F. And just like in school, when nobody wanted to come home with an F, no self-respecting highway engineer wanted to have their project come home with an F. So the problem with it is it was created for the interstate system, and then they started, and I was guilty of this, we started applying it to cities. And I wrote an article on this that was put up at it's still on the PPS, Project for Public Spaces website. But basically, the article says, would you use a rototiller to get the weeds out of your garden? Because what'll happen is, as you can see, he's also destroying the beauty of the garden. And when you go to our cities and our communities and our small villages, creating a high level of service is like, it's the wrong tool. You need more balanced things. You need this proactive design so that it's safe for all users. And we'll get into that a little more as well. The interesting thing about this is, all over the country, I'm telling you, all over the country, engineers and planners and DOTs think there's a mandate that if you want federal money, you have to achieve a C or a D, right? My mother would not like a C or a D, but federal highway, in the DOT engineers are okay with a C or a D, but it's not true. There's no, and so in New Jersey, I was head of project planning and development, and any of you folks have been to North Jersey realize it's very densely developed. It was developed back in the 30s and 40s. There's a lot of buildings on top of the roadway. And so when we had some projects and we're trying to widen it till we got the level of service D, we would end up taking, it was projected that we would take so many businesses and homes that we wouldn't have to widen the road anymore because all the traffic generators would go away. So I pressed somebody in our division office to ask, do we really got to go the level of service C or D? And that's when I first found out that there is no mandate. The only mandate it was back in the 50s and 60s for the interstate system. There was a memorandum that came out that said, you have to achieve a free flowing roadway if you want to get interstate money. But it's not true. It's not true for other roads, yet somehow that myth persists. So some final thoughts about roadway design, and I think Isabel, this is kind of what you were talking about, Cynthia too, right? If you look at these two slides, oftentimes proactive roadway design means that, you know, put some curves in the road, maybe narrow the lanes, do things to slow down the traffic, which is a different concept from what was being done and still being done in a lot of places around the country, including New Jersey, which is that there's something called the design speed, which is to figure out how fast most drivers want to drive and then create dimensions to do it, create a design to do it. Proactive roadway design says find the operating speed. Now, the operating speed is the speed that 85% of the cars are traveling at. And so create a design to speed so that you can choose an operating speed as opposed to let it happen by the actual design. So it's another way of talking about this, and this is being pushed out by headquarters, Federal Highway Administration, is engineering for speed management. The whole idea of self-enforcing roads. You shouldn't count on numbers on a sign to tell folks how fast or slow to go, because they usually don't follow it. So you need to self-enforce the speeds that you want, the curves, and other things, bulb outs. So some of you may recognize this, and this I think is a case of the difference between the desired operating speed, the actual operating speed, the design speed, and the speed limit. So as you look at this road, what do you think the actual operating speed is on Route 75 in Haley, Main Street in Haley?
I can tell you what the 85th percentile is. It's about 26.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay. When I was there, I guess a lot of folks were felt that it was going much faster and that the trucks were rumbling and so on. Okay, well, whatever. The concept is, however, the whole idea would be to try to get the operating speed in line with what you really want it to be, not it's just happening, in line with the posted speed limit, and then also with the design speed. And that's proactive. That's an example of proactive roadway design. And this is a graphic from a Federal Highway Administration presentation that talks about it. You want to get those three things closer and closer together, because then that creates a safer thing. Because in a situation like this, it only takes one person going. So if 85% of the people are going at 26, it only takes one person to go 40 and start weaving in and out to create unsafe conditions for everybody. So the whole idea is to try to get these three things in line together. So now I'm going to talk about strategies to overcome barriers and how to work with transportation agencies. And this is something that my mother taught me, and I talked about it before, getting hit in the head with a rock. I mean, when I was yelled at by, and I was yelled at by a lot of people in my career, in my 34 years, this works better, right? That be informed, do your homework, but treat engineers and planners like people, because that's what they are. So you do that, but don't be afraid to escalate. Once you try to get what you want out of your transportation department, whether it's local or state, at a certain point in time, if you think you know or you're not getting the right answer you want, don't be afraid to escalate, but agree to disagree. Don't, nobody likes being showed up to the boss. So do your homework. Don't just walk in. When I was at the DOT and somebody would walk in and they would just complain and they would be nasty and whatever, but they hadn't done their homework, it's not a good thing. So what I'm suggesting is go out, gather information, walk the site, make sure you're prepared to carry on a conversation and define the problem, not the solution. And by that, I mean, talk about, don't go in and ask for a traffic light, because a lot of times, and who's the engineer here? What's your name? Is it Joel? Cynthia, who's the engineer?
It's Joel.
Yeah.
Joel, right? You know, so like there's warrants, right, for all things like mid-block crossings and traffic signals and so on. And I'm sure it's different in Haley, but in New Jersey, particularly working with the state DOT, I sat in a lot of rooms where somebody would come in with a traffic signal and the engineer would say, I can't give you a traffic signal. I can't give you a mid-block crosswalk. As opposed to what would happen would be if the citizen would come in and say, I don't feel safe crossing at this intersection. Are there things that you could do to make it safer and make me feel more comfortable to allow my child to go on the way to school without me going along? So that's what I mean by define the problem, not the solution. I saw a lot of people, if those of you who go back to my era, remember dealing with DOS. If you ask the wrong question, this is what you get. And so what you need to do is not really ask for a particular feature but then instead describe it in layman's terms. And the engineers, most engineers will work with you when you work with them and say, can you help me make this road safer and more comfortable? There's tools, there's lots of tools for doing your homework. These two things are things that I worked up when I was at PPS so that people can go out and ask questions like, are you comfortable? How do you feel as a pedestrian on the street? Are you comfortable bicycling on the street? Get a little more specific on the left side of the form. Cynthia told me that you guys use the AARP walk audit tool. And it's actually a booklet, at least the version that I have. So there's, I guess, a bunch of different forms. So, but, you know, if you go do this and it gets people organized around, and it's another good feature of this is it gets the community in agreement in terms of what the problem is, right? I think that one of the things that frustrate engineers more than anything, and you know, engineers, I mean, I know I was, if people came in and were saying different things and they weren't all in alignment, then I would oftentimes worry that, you know, if we agree to do something for somebody, then somebody who didn't like it would go back and get the mayor or somebody from the council to come in. So the best way to avoid that happening is to use tools like this to get everybody in sync. There is a role for the community. It's not all on the engineers, right? Engineers can set the table for a good street, but you have to do things. You don't necessarily have to put parklets out there, although I think in Haley, you have put a parklet or two, but you know, the community has to think, this has to be a partnership between the planners, the engineers, and the state DOT and the local engineers. So this is Sandpoint, and you know, we want to create streets what the community could do. And it was done back in our older towns that go back, that predate World War II. You know, they were designed like this, where you have a sense of being in an outdoor room. You can look in the windows. All these things alert motorists. This sends a signal to the motorists that things are going on here, and it taps their natural intuition to slow down, as opposed to simply trying to put numbers on a sign. This is a guy that wrote a book from Australia called, his name was David Enright, talked about mental speed bumps, and he talked about introducing intrigue, uncertainty, and humor into our roads to, you know, tap the nosiness of people to kind of slow down to see what's going on. So things like painting murals on blank walls. That's a statue. That's not really a woman. It's a statue with somebody with bread. And this is across the river from where I live. And every 6 months I forget she's there, and I'm coming down the roadway and I'm subconsciously paying attention to something else and speeding. All of a sudden I see her and she, you know, like, oh, she got me again. But you know, all these little things start adding up in terms of slowing down traffic.
Just adding to that, I sent an email today, something I was thinking about, because the culture in Haley I'm finding, because I'm out on bikes with kids every day, I was riding on Main Street yesterday. I got screamed at for no reason. People scoff at me. Like, people get mad that I have kids on the bike path. I mean, it's just like, I had 3 people, do like the whole outraged hand thing that I was at the crosswalk. And I'm trying to think of a solution for this. And it's funny you bring that up, because my idea was to find somewhere in Haley to paint a mirror along the theme of being aware on the road, and that would grab people's attention as they're driving by when they're entering town, to hopefully have that theme percolating while they're driving through Haley. Because the biggest problem I'm facing is that nobody wants to share the road. Nobody's thinking about how they need to slow down because there's kids trying to cross the street on bike because of, that infrastructure problem. So it's just funny you bring that up, because that was one of the ideas I had, was just kind of like a Haley share the road mural, and, like a painting with bikes and cars and walkers or something like that, just to catch people's attention.
Well, that's one thing, right? A road like this, and I probably should have picked one from my hometown, right? So I can pick on myself. But, in my hometown, there's before we put that road on a road diet, that was 4 lanes and now it's 2 lanes. I would watch the difference in driver behavior, because as they were coming from one direction on the state highway, they were at a traffic light and they made a right turn. And the crosswalk was maybe 100 feet from that intersection. So the car was only going 5 to 10 miles an hour. And boom, if I stepped into that crosswalk, the car would yield. But if they were coming from the other direction, where the previous stoplight was probably 2 or 3 miles down the road, and they're going on this road at 40 miles an hour on a 4-lane roadway, 2 lanes, 2 cars side by side, they didn't yield. And I experienced it when I was in the car at that intersection, because I have too many decisions, right? The first thing that when I see somebody in there, first thing I would do is look up on my rearview mirror. Is somebody behind me coming along at 40 miles an hour? Is there somebody alongside me? What happens? There's instances where I've seen people where the car in this lane would stop, but the car here was blocked from viewing the pedestrian. So there's a lot of things that contribute to, I think, what you were saying, Isabel, in terms of the inability to yield. I think you did do some of this, right? We wrote a report, a 60-page report, and when Cameron Ellis lived there, I think he was spearheading some of that, and Kaz and Lisa. So I think there was an alley there that you put some stuff in. I think you did some stuff on one of your streets to make a plaza. So all of these kind of things are ways to slow down traffic.
I'm going to jump in for just a second, Gary. Has anybody on this call from Haley, did anybody participate in that traffic calming work and the placemaking work that we did? I don't know, what was that, 6 or 7 years ago, Gary?
I think 2015.
2015. Any of you on this call involved in that?
What street was it on?
It was the whole town, but the original focus was Main Street.
Yeah, I was not part of that, no.
I actually started for the city of Haley in fall 2015, so I wasn't here for that either.
Okay. Well, we can, I'll resend the report to Cynthia and she could share it with you to see. And I think some of the stuff actually was implemented. Around that time, Haley passed a referendum to put a surcharge on the property taxes to pay for some of the stuff. I think some of it was a bike boulevard on one of the streets that are parallel to Main Street. And that was one of our recommendations, right? Which is like not to try to dissuade people necessarily from riding on Main Street, but you've got 2 streets that are parallel to it that are much calmer, much slower. So, some of the plazas, some of the parklets, I think we were have been implemented, but you guys live there, you have to tell me.
So they did put in an advisory street or advisory lanes on a parallel street to Main Street. So it's a single lane street with two bike pedestrian lanes, one on each side.
Okay.
And then a perpendicular street to Main Street got some curb extensions and a pathway.
Yeah, we also generated, I could send them to you, Joel. Well, I'll send the report to Cynthia. But we also generated, we had an animation put up where, I mean, the original premise was that Lisa Horowitz asked us to come in and look at whether the 5-lane cross section the road could be put on a road diet to 3 lanes or 4 lanes or whatever. So we created an animation where the extra space would be, it would go from 5 lanes to 3 lanes with a center turning lane, 2 lanes with a median and pedestrian islands, put bike lanes on either side, build the sidewalks out, not necessarily physically, but with paint and blocks and so on, all sorts of different ways to change the road. And that part of it was considered a little too controversial at the time. I think the mayor decided not to press it and go forward with the other stuff, but the report is still there.
I do know that one of the big challenges, and King could probably say this better than me, but I think if you put in, like if you remove the center lane and put in like an island in there, it makes the snow removal really difficult because that's where they store all the snow when they're plowing.
Yeah, you'd have to visualize it. We plow the sidewalks into the parking lanes or the parking area. From parking area, we use the grader to rick it into the center of the main street. And then from the center of Main Street, we use a blower to blow it into trucks and then haul the snow out of town. So we can't really block that center lane because that's where we put all of our snow.
Yeah, but could you push it on an island, a mountable island?
But then we would have to have equipment to remove it from that island.
I see. All right, well, that's a choice. We ready to move on?
Let's move on.
All right, so this is a little story that I read, an anecdote I read a long time ago about engineers not being bad people. Engineers are problem solvers. And so it's the time of the French Revolution, and the guillotine was hard at work every day. And on this particular day, they were leading a priest, a drunk, and an engineer to the guillotine. So they asked the priest, as a last wish, does he want to face up or down when he meets his fate? The priest says that he would like to look face up, and they raise the blade. The henchman pulls the lever, and nothing happens. The authorities take this as divine intervention and says, you're free to go. Next, the drunk gets up, same story. Do you want to face up or face down? The drunk says, well, it worked for her father. I want to go face up. Same thing happens. The blade doesn't come down, and he's released. The engineer goes up, and as he's looking up, he looks up and says, I see what your problem is. I see where the thing is stuck. And I guess the premise, the punchline of this is that engineers, I was taught to be a problem solver in college. I was taught not to get emotional about things, to deal with the problem that's presented to us, and to find a solution. And so since I've been at the DOT starting in '73 and even 20 years longer than that, the problem that the majority of engineers were being presented with is to keep cars on roads moving quickly and safely. And we have done an absolutely amazing job at solving that. But now it's 2022, and if we want a different solution, then we have to work with them to define the problem differently. And I'm quite comfortable. I mean, this is the world is changing. and more people are prioritizing vibrant downtowns and the vibrancy of a downtown and making a balance. So yeah, engineers are not bad people. I wrote a book about this when I first went to Project with Public Spaces back in 2008, 2009, about how to communicate with engineers, all the lingo in there, the level of service, design speed, functional classification, what the role of the community is and what they have to do, doing your homework. So this book can, if you Google A Citizen's Guide for Better Streets, you should be able to download it online. Okay.
So I think at this time we'll open it up to questions. Well, people are thinking about their questions. I do have a question for you, Gary. You did that traffic calming in Lambertville, and it looks like you only used paint to do that. And did you lower the posted speed limit, or were people going above the speed limit and you just wanted them to go the posted speed limit, or what was your thinking there?
Well, the thinking was that they were routinely traveling at 45, 50, and 55 miles an hour. I forget the term for it, Joel, maybe you'll remember, but the, what do you call it? The pace speed was 48, right? Which is and so the whole goal was not to get it below 35 or 40, but to get it down to 35 and 40. The reason for the paint was that, first off, it's cheaper, right? I don't know, maybe today with the infrastructure bill, New Jersey DOT has got more money than it did 2-3 years ago when it did this. But back then, we were just flat out of cash. And so paint is cheaper. But the other thing is, people who were nervous about it, and there were people who were nervous about reducing the number of lanes, it's reversible. You know, it doesn't take, I mean, they put that in a 3-day weekend, restriped it, and they could take it out on a 3-day weekend. And that tends to ease a lot of concerns, a lot of resistance.
But it's effective and it's inexpensive, right?
It's effective and it's inexpensive.
Hmm.
In fact, I think the DOT even had further savings because they had a schedule they were going to resurface, and actually I think they didn't reconstruct it, or they resurfaced it, and they had a resurfacing scheduled for a year or two later, and they just moved it up a year. And then, so along the way they came in and then they put the paint down then. So basically they kind of leveraged the cost.
Thank you, Gary. Does anybody have a question for Gary at this time? Joel, go ahead.
Yeah, so, well, I guess first I should clarify, I'm a mechanical engineer. I'm a problem solver still, but not much knowledge of transportation and roads. Yeah, I'm definitely interested in promoting bike and pedestrian safety and pathways in our town. I know our city council has a lot of pathway projects, but one thing that kind of got me involved is I'd like to make them function better. And a lot of that comes down to, I guess, one, maybe slowing traffic, and two, creating some good transitions or safe crossings on the streets. And, you know, I feel like, you know, I've already over the last 4 years kind of had some discussions and kind of presented these, you know, concerns, but, you know, and I think that was one thing you mentioned, like, you know, present the problem. But I think, you know, the interpretation of what is a problem, like I was just at a city council meeting on Monday, and if they want to put in, say, a 4-way stop to make an intersection safer, they want to see 300 vehicles per hour or 300 bikes and pedestrians per hour before they would do that. And, you know, so there's some sort of criteria in their traffic study that they're using. So I think, you know, a lot of times, I don't know, I'm not sure if that's like the same type of criteria you used, or if you've heard of that, or, you know, is safety for one person sufficient?
Well, I think that's a decision that each community has to decide. And of course, with street engineering, they do have warrants, right? There's the MUTCD, the Manual Uniform Traffic Control Devices. But there's always ways around that. And so I think it's up to each town. And when you come into a village like downtown Haley, I think it's up to the town folks to decide on what the right balance is. I can tell you, having spent a week there, and most of the time we were talking about the community. I told Lisa that we are not going to talk about Main Street until the community was ready to talk about Main Street. Let's talk about what you want your town to be, because then once you get there, then the next conversation is, how does Main Street help or hinder Haley being all that it can be? And so when we were walking around, and even the mayor, there's a video out right on Vimeo. It's called On the Ground in Haley. And the mayor and Lisa came on and say, basically Main Street is dividing the town into two, that there's two sides that people, it's not that they never cross that street, but that they think twice before they cross that street. The shop owners were saying that they felt the trucks were intimidating and deterring people away from business, that there wasn't enough sidewalk activity. So, people after 4 days started identifying Main Street as a problem to Haley being all that it could be. And that's them. I carefully stayed away from presenting my opinion in terms of what the problem was. Let me ask
So
you-
we have done some stuff over the last few years to help alleviate truck movement. They did narrow the lanes down to 11 foot. And as somebody that drives semi through town, I'd prefer 12 foot. But it has brought the 85th percentile down a little bit by narrowing the lanes. And then it was just repaved, so we have new crosswalks all the way through town, so they're popping. We just installed another RFD on this end of town in an area where traffic's going to start picking up, foot traffic is. So we are being proactive in working to get traffic to slow down a little bit and focus more on the businesses.
Yeah, I've picked up on that. I've seen that. So I have a question for you folks, because in certain ways, this situation is similar to my hometown, right? In the town, the road was 4 lanes, but just south of town and just north of town, it was only 2 lanes, 1 lane in each direction. And it was that way for 8 miles north and 8 miles south. So in essence, the town became a little bit of a passing lane. And so that was part of the and the ADT was only about 15,000. So I'm no longer with the state DOT, but some of my former mates at the state DOT basically said, we're fine with reducing it. What do you think would be the issue in Haley in terms of traffic flow? I think there's only 1 traffic light in town, right? In terms of what would be the real adverse impact? On the Main Street, there's 4.
Yes, we have 4 traffic lights. 1 as you come into town, 1 at Airport Way, middle of town, and then north end of town.
Okay.
Currently, what we're seeing as far as traffic flow is our 8 a.m. traffic's backing up 2.5, 3 blocks with both lanes. So we're seeing that backing up in the morning. I wonder if narrowing it down to a single lane would only cause that to back up even farther, which we've seen through the road construction process, where we closed the lane and it backed it up all the way outside of town.
Okay.
I'd like to invite, we have 2 people here from Orofino. I don't want to focus although I find Haley fascinating, I also find Orofino fascinating. Brenda or Anne, would either of you like to comment on what's going on up in Orofino? Because you definitely have a state highway and high speeds. Do you want to talk about that? It definitely cut your community.
Yeah, I'm Ann Lima, and I think we have a similar problem of like a fast, a Highway 12 that goes kind of alongside part of our town. I think we've discussed that our town is pretty much split up into two parts by the river, and there's a highway on one side of it. It definitely, it discourages people from walking on that road. It's 5 lanes, so 2 lanes on each side with a middle lane. There is many logging trucks that go down. Well, they go down all of the the roads in our town, and so, but just, I don't know. Thank you for your presentation and your knowledge sharing. Everything that I've heard has been helpful, and then everything you say, just trying to think about how we could adapt it to our local community. Whether it's roundabouts to slow people down, or thinking about also those corners that you were talking about. I don't know. I was thinking about like a roundabout at kind of the Michigan Avenue Highway 12 to slow people down. As a physician in our town, we see a lot of accidents from that intersection. We've brought it up to DOT, and we were told it did not meet something like accident criteria to change anything. So I think that's a problem just from a car and motorcycle standpoint. And then there's multiple intersections we've talked about in terms of pedestrian safety as well. And I was looking at that the Haley Main Street when you said it, and we were like, oh, what speed do you think people would go on this? And I'm like, if I would go down and I wasn't seeing a sign, I would probably go 45 down that distance there with kind of all the lanes and everything. And I took something recently from one of our talks in that kind of the speed at which you go, like percent fatality if you hit someone, I guess. And that has really stuck with me, kind of in this, as a pedestrian and as a driver, and kind of looking at how we are in our roads. And so, I don't know, sorry, that was a lot of rambling, but I appreciate the presentation, and those are kind of my thoughts.
Tell me again, why did they say that they said around that there weren't enough accidents for them to justify a roundabout?
Yeah, so I don't recall. I was not the person that contacted the Department of Transportation, but we, as like our trauma committee, meeting and reviewing cases on a regular basis. There's a so I don't know exactly what they said, but they were not. They said they have done an analysis on it in the past, and it did not warrant any change. But yeah, as a trauma committee in our hospital, looking at the accidents that happen at this intersection, and this doesn't have to do with pedestrians, because there's no way people could cross at that area, to be quite honest. But there's a 50-mile-an-hour highway and a 25-mile-an-hour road that both have they're 4 lanes across and it's a T intersection. And there tends to be a lot of accidents from people turning. So yeah, and so like fatalities on motorcycles specifically. So anyway, but like needing a slowing down.
I'm trying to be careful what I say, because I don't know a lot of details, and I don't want to get you stirred up with ITD, but that doesn't sound right. There's a lot of reasons for putting in a roundabout. And just down the road from me, in fact, the same thing in Idaho Falls, right? Put roundabouts at the interchanges of an interstate. And they did it for congestion reasons, not for safety reasons, because the stuff used to back up all the time. So you can put in roundabouts for congestion. You could put it in to slow down traffic for pedestrians. That could be sufficient reason to do it. I've never heard somebody say there's not enough crashes in order to put it in. But I guess it's the first time for everything. So maybe we should talk a little bit. Cynthia, maybe set up a, we could talk about this a little more and to get into the specifics.
I will put a link on the webpage to the LTAC crash map. For those of you that haven't seen that, you can actually look at the crashes in your community for the last 5 years. I don't know if I think 2021 has been loaded in there so that you can see it, and they're color coded so you can see the different types of crashes. And that might be helpful for all of you. The other thing is ITD put in those double roundabouts in Idaho Falls, and I believe they're putting another one in up in North Idaho. I think it's in Sagal, but I'm not sure. So those are District 1 and District 6, and you all are in District 4 and District 2. And as Gary mentioned, ITD is very decentralized. So it's not like headquarters categorizes all this information. So it's hard to say, well, this was done in this district, why can't we have it in our district? But I think that might be helpful that ITD is putting roundabouts onto state highways now, and we are seeing that happen, and that might help you in your communities.
It's Brenda. Hey, I do know that they were talking about on Highway 7 into the Michigan Avenue thing. They were talking about looking at a roundabout. There's a lot of conversation because we do have a lot of logging trucks, big vehicles, that kind of thing. But I did find that slide interesting to see, because one of the questions is, if you got big logging trucks, how do you put it in this location? And I did like the slides demonstrating how it kind of goes over that. I don't know what you call it, the inner circle, just to demonstrate how that actually can work. So that I can see where that would be helpful for the people who are questioning the roundabout situation or the recommendation for that actual intersection.
Call it a mountable apron. So let me take you for a ride down Main Street in my hometown, where I taught my 3 kids to drive, and to talk about this whole idea of how can you see this intersection here with the food and flower market here? Did I pick the right?
Yep.
Okay. So I used to take my kids for a ride down this road, and they would obey the speed limit here. Oh, oops, didn't mean to do that. And then all of a sudden, they would start speeding up when they got here. Now, this is the ball fields associated with the community school, the elementary school that they used to go to all the time. So they were very familiar. They used to cross these streets all the time, and we let them by themselves because we felt the town was safe. But I began to notice that they would go from 25 gradually up to 30 and 35 miles an hour as the street environment around them changed. And this was back when I was learning a lot about a lot of these different features. And all of a sudden I had this aha, right? It's happening. My kids are reacting to the surrounding environment, not the number on the sign. And so that's when I sort of had my epiphany and became a big believer in doing things. And like the 11-foot lanes, that's a great thing. And some of the crosswalks that Joel and King were talking about in town. And all of this stuff, little things add up to sort of create the environment that subconsciously tells a driver that there's pedestrians here. So, yeah, I just wanted to share that.
I want to ask a question of King about that because he made a comment. Because King, are you there? Okay, good. So it sounds like you drive a big truck for your job. Is that right?
Yeah, I run the haul trucks and stuff too, plus our load grader, road loaders, stuff like that.
Okay. And you made the comment that you don't like 11-foot lanes, but you like 12-foot lanes. Can you talk about that and what you do when you are on an 11-foot lane?
I'm going to slow down. So
Oh.
it achieves the goal, but it's a comfort level. It'd be no different than if you're in your car and you're driving through a narrow area, except I'm driving something a lot larger, and there's smaller cars on beside of me and stuff. So you have this constant awareness that you could damage a lot of stuff, and you just feel confined. So of course I like larger spaces because I'm not feeling as confined. But I do agree, it does achieve the goal of slowing that traffic down.
Yeah,
Thanks.
my opinion about this stuff is this. See, I'm not a pedestrian Nazi or a bike Nazi. I'm an advocate for having a conversation. And in Haley, for instance, we were there for a whole week, intensive every day. But I mean, just having a continuing conversation, putting all the stuff on the table, all the different ways that Main Street, Route 75 help and hurt Haley, and put it in there, talk about the shop owners, talk about crossing the road, talk about the pedestrians, and talk about the trucks, talk about the people that are going, I guess it's Caldwell to the south and Ketchum to the north, and the effect of and put it all in there and have these conversations about it. And no longer, I mean, I was guilty of this myself in my early days at New Jersey DOT. We skewed the system, right? We were saying we had to achieve a level of service D. We were prioritizing the vehicles back in 1970, 1980, and so on. And so, these days, I think we need to think more about the whole picture. And, in New Jersey, these small towns, just like, and I think in Idaho to a certain extent, these small places like Sandpoint and Haley and Ketchum are economic engines for the state. And part of that is because they're cool places. They're really cool places. So I'm not advocating always shrinking stuff. I'm not advocating shrinking the road always. I'm just saying we really should have a conversation. And as a town, the same thing in Orofino, as a town, decide what you want to do. And it seems like ITD allowed that to happen in Haley, right? I mean, they were the ones that it wouldn't be 11-foot lanes if they didn't restripe it that way. So I'm not sure. I don't know what the district and how different the district is in Orofino, but the key would be, I think, and you could see it happening in all different DOTs in all different states, and you could see, I mean, they're building roundabouts in Idaho Falls, right? And they decided not to build the curve in Sandpoint, right? So ITD will listen to communities. So it's up to the community, I think, to sort of get together and decide what they want to do.
Anybody else have a question or a comment? We have a few more minutes with Gary before he vanishes into his New Jersey lifestyles. Joel, do you have a question?
Yeah, I guess I was just hoping you could clarify. One of your first slides showed, narrower lanes, and then the crash risk went up as the lanes got smaller. I mean, we've talked about how it slows traffic down, but that graphic pointed out the crash risk increase. And I was just wondering if that's accurate.
I think maybe the slide was deceiving. The crash rates went down.
Oh,
Let me find it.
yeah, let's look at that again. Oh, yeah, well, yeah.
I gotta hit share. It's this one, I think, right?
I don't
That's
see
I don't see anything. I don't see us.
the end of the slideshow.
Yeah.
well, all right. I'm being somewhat inept here. What it showed was that the crash rate went down by about 25%.
Okay.
I could, I could send you some of this stuff.
Yeah, I'd like to take a closer look at that. And I was just thinking, I mean, I like the idea of slowing traffic down. I think the lane width, can definitely help with that. And like to King's concern, I can definitely see that like with a 4-lane, when you've got cars on either side of you, but we also have some streets with bike paths, and maybe we can create narrow lanes, but then have it's a single, it's just 2 lanes. So the only cars next to you would be the ones going the opposite direction, but we could have like maybe a larger buffer zone too. But visually the lanes would be small, maybe keep people slow, but with a larger buffer zone and no cars next to you, maybe that would kind of work with the larger vehicles.
You'll see that on River. I just spent the last 3 days tabbing that, is that we're going to 11-foot lanes, 3.5-foot buffer, and then a 5-foot bike path on each side. And that's through up next to Albertsons there, where we're removing all the parking and putting the bike lanes in.
So what do you think about that from your perspective of driving large trucks?
I just won't go down that road.
Yeah.
So let me chime in, take a little risk here, chime in about the snow removal stuff, right? I remember when I was in Haley, somebody that came up back then too. Somebody said, well, we're here in northern Idaho, right? We get a lot more snow than you do in New Jersey. And I actually went back and looked it up, and we get not every year, but in probably every 3rd year, we were getting in 35, 36 inches of snow, which is very similar to Haley. And what happens is, I mean, in Lambertville on our main streets, there's no place. You saw the one road, right? There's no place to put it. And so they would pile it on top of the parked cars. And so for 3 to 4 days, 5 days, until the town can come in with a back end loader and dig it out, the town just changed. And people, the day or two after a snowstorm here in New Jersey, would put on cross-country skis and ski down the main street and say, this is fun. So I guess my point is, again, it's just in Lambertville, we don't have a choice, right? We don't have, other than that one stretch that we just did the road diet in, we don't have, the roads are constrained by buildings right up on top of things. And but we just live with it, right? For 3 to 4 days a year, so that the rest of the year you end up with, we love our town. We don't want it to not be cool. And a developer came in and wanted to put a development in, did the traffic analysis, and he wanted to put left turn slots in at all the intersections downtown. And the people almost lynched the guy for that, right? So, just something to think about. I understand what you're saying. It makes it more difficult to get rid of the snow, but so what? I mean, how long does it stay? In Haley, after is it usually followed by a long stretch where it's cold and stays there all winter, or?
Yeah, our snow's probably from December through February. We've had a couple 30-inch storms in March. I agree. I think at this point, what we've done is we've offered a level of service, and if we were to pull back from that level of service, we would get lynched, which is always a concern. Just because of how far above and beyond we go with cleaning the sidewalks, hauling all that snow out of town. And, you know, we have, the rick that I'm talking about, the center of the road's 8 feet tall sometimes, and that'll last 2 or 3 days before we can even get that moved out of town.
Right.
While maintaining through cleaning all the subdivisions as well.
Well, I am aware that there was resistance to the idea. Some people liked the idea of a road diet. Some people didn't. And after I left, you know, I was told that the mayor decided not to go for it because the town wasn't unified behind the whole idea. So I'm aware that there's people that are for and against it. But, you know, usually once it happens, which is why I think a lot of times if you do stuff with paint, then their worst fears are not confirmed. Also, you know, in Trenton, down the road from where I live, there was a plan at one point. We were asked by the city to change a freeway section into a boulevard right on the Trenton waterfront, and the freeway was keeping people from getting to the waterfront. So we did a net sim analysis, a traffic simulation, right? And you know, people were like, "Oh my God, you can't do this!" And you know, putting traffic lights in where we have a freeway. And we discovered that the average trip in and out of Trenton went from 47 minutes to 48 and a half, right? Because what happened was once we put the traffic lights in, then and slowed it down in the center of Trenton, it was alleviating some congestion where they would pile up, you know, traveling through town very quickly, it would pile up at traffic lights north and south of town. And I'm not saying that's the case in Haley, but a lot of times it's the people's fears of what will happen they're worse than the reality.
I think I'm going to end us on that note, Gary.
Okay.
That's good. It's a good thought, unless King wants to respond. I want him to have the opportunity. Okay, good. Well, King, I want you to know I'm really glad you're here because you offer a different perspective, and that's super important. So thanks for joining.
And it's a good,
I apologize. I try not to be too defensive. I love my roads. I love what I do. So I try to be both sides of that.
speaking for myself, I didn't take you that way. I thought it was great. I thought it was a great conversation, and I hope I didn't come across as a bike walking Nazi, right? I mean, the stuff. Every town, every DOT has to put it. Every town is different. You got different ingredients, and so you mix the ingredients differently depending on the recipe that you want. So, I'm just here because Cynthia invited me.
Well, and Haley does get a lot of snow, and Haley has you guys have challenges that we don't have here in Boise, for example, and that's why these discussions are so important to hear all the different perspectives. So with that, I want to thank Gary Toth for joining us today. Thank you, Gary. That was excellent, and I hope everybody enjoyed it. Our next time together will be Thursday, August 11th, and we'll send some readings out to the group then. So unless anybody has anything additional to add, I'd like to adjourn our meeting. Does that sound good to everybody? All right.
Yes.
Thank
Thank you.
Take care. Thank you.